The animal nutritionist works with diets, works with nutrition, just like what you would expect with a human nutritionist. So if you were to go to your dietitian or nutritionist, they would be looking at your diet, doing a diet review, doing a diet intake study of what you've been eating, and then they would put actions in place to help you get closer to what we think is appropriate for you. At the zoo, it's exactly the same, reviewing what we think that animal needs, reviewing what they're actually getting and trying to bridge the gap. Diet is a big part of every animal's day, particularly animals that eat many times across the day. It's not just what we provide or what we offer, but it's how we offer it. So how do we prepare the diet? How do we present it? How can we manipulate that to stimulate as much positive behaviour as we can, or at least behaviour that they would naturally be engaging in the wild? So if there's an item that's nutritionally appropriate, but it's consumed very quickly or doesn't really stimulate many positive behaviours, then we might want to review that, see if we can find an item that better stimulates behaviour whilst capturing all the nutrients that particular species needs. So an example is a giraffe. Obviously they're browsing animals, so they pluck leaves and eat twigs and branches and woody leafy material in the wild. So we provide as much of that as possible in a zoo setting, but we certainly can't provide as much variety as they would naturally be exposed to in the wild. And there comes some potential inadequacies within the diet, within certain nutrients. So we provide a pellet to balance that portion of the diet. So coming up with a diet is quite a process, particularly for species with very little information available in the literature, very few studies done on that particular species. So birds and reptiles are really lagging there. There's a lot of emphasis on mammals, and then it's really important to get that feedback from keepers, because they're the ones looking at the animals, working with the animals every day, and they're seeing the animals much more up close and personal than I am. So getting that feedback is really important, and then again it comes back to this constant cycle of reviewing, refining, tweaking to get the diet to a place that you're happy with. One of the key challenges when animals come into a zoo, trying to replicate the fibre content that animal would consume, or that species would naturally consume. So in the wild, this is obviously species specific, but fibre is often a big part of natural diet. And then when you put that animal into a zoo setting, often sugar takes that place. So sugar and starch are often increased and fibre decreases for whatever reason, whether it's the challenge of finding an appropriate food item, the food items that we just have available in general. Obviously the animal influences the acceptance of that food item is a big part of it. So the challenge in a zoo setting is trying to increase fibre and decrease sugar and starch. So an example here at the zoo is with our primate. We call it a primate cake. And so what I was finding is that we needed more fibre. So we actually use a product called carob fibre, which is part of the carob pod from the carob tree. We add that carob fibre to the primate cake to increase fibre. It's just a good example of how we're trying to increase fibre in a diet. Of course, that's moving more towards the artificial diet perspective, and we want to emphasise the naturalistic side of their diets as much as possible. So if they're a browsing animal, a leaf eater, providing as much leafy material as possible. And here's one of those challenges with primates in particular. They are fruit eaters. So to replicate that fruit diet in a zoo setting is really challenging, because our fruit, the fruits that are bred for human consumption, are very much higher in sugar and lower in fibre than what these animals would be consuming in the wild. And one of the species that we previously have done is the Asian small-clawed otter. So part of that review was looking into, obviously, their diet. Traditionally, the otters have been fed a lot of fish, and then what we were finding in the review of the literature is they didn't actually eat that much. Their primary diet item were crustaceans. That came out of it, but you've got to think about what comes along with it. So with a crab, do they actually have to manipulate and work with that to get to the fleshy material? How does that influence feeding behaviour and their activity budget? So if they spend a certain amount of time feeding per day, if they engage in particular behaviours to eat that particular item, that is also something that we need to look at that you wouldn't necessarily get by offering fish. So by changing to crustaceans, which we have done, or feeding, at least increasing the proportion of crustaceans in the diet, we've actually been able to reduce the fish portion, increase the crustaceans and mollusks, and we've actually seen really good results in terms of behaviour, engaging in that feeding behaviour, dental health, body weights, condition. So that's just an example of how we've been able to review the literature and actually put something into practice. The purpose of a nutritionist at the zoo, it's investing in someone that has a specific role in looking at diets and nutrition and the impact of that on that particular animal's journey within the zoo. In a perfect world, we'd all love to see animals roaming in the wild, but unfortunately the way things are going in the world, animals are struggling, and that's where zoos, and good zoos in particular, are coming in and playing a really vital role, not only in protecting species and trying to engage in breeding programs to potentially re-release or release animals into the wild, but educating the public and just being a real ambassador for conservation and animals and the role and their importance in the world. Good zoos play a really critical role, and I think that's been improving. And nutrition is obviously part of that. So if an animal comes into a zoo setting, what can we do from a nutrition and diet perspective to maximise their nutrition-related health and welfare, whether they're bred with the intention to release or bred with the intention as a collection animal to help educate. Nutrition is really important for that reproductive stage of life, whether that's associated with increased activity levels prior to breeding, certainly late pregnancy, late gestation, as with humans, that's a really critical stage. Once they've given birth, that lactation period, that initial period is super important, particularly for the mum, as with humans. And then obviously for the growing individual, nutrition is just vital. You know, it's something that all animals need, but it's particularly important for late gestation, lactation and growing animals, and supporting those individuals during those life stages to keep them fit and healthy, happy, hopefully, strong and resilient.